Folks, welcome back to So Bad It's Good, presented by Betches Media. Today is a banner day on So Bad It's Good because there is a new show that I talked about recently on ABC that just entered its 17th season called What Would You Do? And it kind of reveals how people behave when they think no one is watching by using hidden cameras to record real reactions in these really incredible, thought-provoking scenarios. And this show brings people together. There is not an episode where I don't tear up at a certain point. The show airs on Wednesdays on ABC, and you can catch up on all episodes streaming on Hulu. Now, we recently had John Quinones on the show. What a legend. And now we get to have another heavy hitter in news with us today. Not only is she the co-host of ABC's juggernaut, The View, but she is also a correspondent on What Would You Do? Ladies and gentlemen, the one and only Sara Haines. Sara, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
I mean, seriously, I'm just kind of blown away to be talking to you because I've watched you on The View. I watch What Would You Do? You had this just really amazing career at such a young age. Can you believe where you are? I mean, you hail from like Iowa, and here you are like on ABC. How amazing is this life that you've created for yourself?
One, I don't feel young. You're sweet when you're like, and at such a young age, I'm like, maybe he read the wrong bio. But with that said, I absolutely pinch myself all the time because, if for any piece of the pie, I would be grateful. But most importantly, I was able to also have a family, which for so many years I was single into my mid 30s. And I was like, wait a second, wasn't this stuff supposed to show up for me? Like I thought that's, what happened in life, and it didn't. So I think the best part is I feel like this would feel empty without that completed part of my pie, which I know you're married as well. You understand kind of finding your person and then to have kids. So I love it because I think I always know if it disappeared tomorrow, I have the most important part established. So it becomes like major frosting on top.
Yeah, it kind of gives you that foundation, your family, and that way you can go and do this kind of amazing career and really reach out to so many people. And I was watching What Would You Do? And I really, true to form, I do tear up in every episode because it shows the best in people. It also shows some really scary scenarios, but usually there is one person that will step up and do the right thing in all of these scenarios. And I think that's what we need right now more than ever, is something to watch with hope in it.
Yep. Well, and that's the difference in my jobs, because with The View, we're often purposely having conversations people disagree on. So we can hopefully be an example of how to, respectfully disagree, make an argument or persuade or whatever, or share. But with this, it's so unifying because it's the human experience. And I think I've been a fan of this show for years and years and years. And John knows this story and he's heard it too many times. But when I first moved to New York, I was doing acting and I auditioned to be one of the actors in What Would You Do? I didn't get the part. Spoiler alert. But I loved the show and I loved the improv of it all, watching actors who go between being the mom to next being the nanny and all the things. But the beauty of it is it highlights, like you said, the heroes among us. You hear the songs like Angels Among Us, like people are everywhere walking among us. And at different times, we're each called to be that person. And would you step up if called?
Yeah. I mean, now sometimes if I'm faced with a scenario, I automatically think I'm on a hidden camera show. So I always do the right thing now just because of your show.
You're like, I don't want to get busted here. So we're going to go out now.
I'm waiting for Sara to come out with like a walkie-talkie and tell me that she's filming this whole interaction. But how did you become part of What Would You Do? And like, what is that process? Do you, at this point, you don't have to audition for things, I would imagine, but this is a little bit of a different animal in terms of The View and certain other things with ABC, Good Morning America and things. How does this come into your life, this opportunity?
Well, I would say that I'm not quite to she doesn't have to audition for this place in my life. I love it though. I'll take all the flowers. But in this instance, it was kind of organic. You're right. I didn't have to audition, but it was for this reason. I had always loved John Quinones, and being at ABC for so many years, I'd seen him. I'd always tell him how much I loved the show. I've been a rabid fan of that show for years because of what it shows in all of us. I want to believe there's good everywhere. So I've always been that way. But then one time I got a call because he was doing an episode on postpartum depression. And I had experienced postpartum with 2 of my 3 kids. And I've been pretty vocal about it as I was going through it because your life's on TV, sharing it, hoping people will say you're not alone. And he had heard that. So when he did the episode, he asked if I'd come be a guest, kind of to help him out. Well, then he asked me, would you want to go into the scene? So you're sitting with him and we're watching. And I'm getting so emotional. I'm feeding lines to the actors as he does, because that was what I was supposed to be offering him as insight.
Yeah.
He turns and he says, would you want to go in? And I was like, well, how many years ago did I try doing this? So yes, please. And then I get in there and I forget how visceral and how those experiences are just 1 second away. And I had a pretty emotional experience with that. And seeing that person come forward in that episode, and I think it's postpartum is obviously, it's the topic itself draws a lot of, people get it, but that episode got a lot of feedback because of how emotional it was. And so at one point when they wanted to span the country and he needed more feet on the ground, boots on the ground, he said, would you want to help me out and go back to your home state? And I was like, go back to Iowa? I pay you, like, I'm in. So that was the beginning. And then it kind of was a seamless relationship where he said, do you want to do it again? And I'm like, I will do it as many times as you invite me to do it. So it was organic in this instance.
I think audiences are really kind of fascinated with how all this gets put together. And Mr. Quinones talked about meeting about the topics and things of that nature. And I don't know if it's like spitballing or like, hey, maybe we could get this, maybe we could get that. And then when you get into the field where you're on that walkie-talkie feeding lines to these actors, improvising these really intense scenarios, is that the process? Like kind of going over the ideas as a potential group and then taking it into the field?
Well, so there are different teams. John is the king of this show. So he's got the one team that follows John. In order to bang out more episodes and have me help him, I'm on a different overall team.
Yeah.
On the ground. So I've been on calls with John, but usually what it'll be is when they ask me to help, John will say, share anything that you're thinking could be a good episode or one that really touches that you want to do it. So you'll I'll be writing around and I'll just jot down ideas. Well, oh, wouldn't it be cool? And they tend to be personal. Like I did a breastfeeding one in public, last year. So obviously the angles I want to attack are different than even John's oftentimes, but
which is so brilliant to have your perspective, because John, he's not going to know about breastfeeding potentially. I mean, these are topics that face women every day. So your voice, I mean, what an incredible fit.
Well, and that's where John he even had W. Kamau Bell last year. And that was such an also added perspective because what we've heard, what we've seen in our lives, our lived experiences are different, which is the beauty of the show. So pitching those ideas, and then you hear the ones you're assigned. And there's not one I've ever been assigned that I wasn't like, oh my God, I'm really curious about this. The biggest distinction in the scenarios is sometimes there are scenarios that are really gray area as to if people will step in. They'll definitely have opinions, but it's not that emotional, visceral response. But when you go in there and you're doing it, you're seeing in real time what the actors are saying, because there's a director that works with them. Like, this is kind of the point. This is the type of stuff you want to see. But as you're watching on hidden cameras, you're seeing the words people respond to and their eyes dart and this, and you're like, say that again louder, and it comes to you naturally what you're starting to see happen on the screen. So it's just, it's phenomenal.
Well, I mean, and then are you able to tease anything in terms of this season in some of these scenarios? Because I was just on your Instagram and you posted this amazing clip, I think, from this week's episode where a child, can't find her parents or her mom, and this other actor steps in of like, I gotcha, like, in a potential abduction scenario. And, there's a wonderful grandma, a real person that steps in and is like, no, I'm going to stay here. And he's like, what? Why do you care? And she's like, I'm a grandma. And once again, waterworks flowing for me. Yep. I'm crying. I mean, was that like this? I mean, how do you face these scenarios? That's such an intense conversation.
Well, it's so super emotional when I knew the topic was stranger danger, because Mike as a mom, but also just I remember being scared of that growing up in the 80s, 90s. Like
Yeah.
that's when the milk carton kids started. So
Or the white van. Be aware of the white van. Yeah.
you don't ever go near a white van. But all those stereotypes. So I always thought from the kids' perspective, what was interesting is the most lines that I fed were to the abductor, and the reason being, I play this game with my kids because I say, if someone were to say, "But I've got a kitty over here," like you could see this kitty,
Yeah.
like if I could woo my own kids, and I constantly say, "What could someone that's a stranger be a grandma?" Yeah. And they could be old. They could look like they're sick. They could have an arm thing on. We go through this. So I kept the worst parts of me started to play into that. And as you watch, the kid's an actor, but I don't know if my kids would have reacted differently. And all that keeps running through your head is, oh my God, will anyone hear this when we can't be there to parent our own? Will
Yeah.
someone help us parent? And that one was, like goosebumps, tears, because some of the people that react. I remember there was a woman in one of these scenarios who had a baby in her arms and had a stroller. She had no hands to give, and she was willing to add someone else's child into her nest to make sure they were okay. It's just
Well, but also, so basically, you're telling me you use your children as dress rehearsals. Dress rehearsals
absolutely.
for what would you do?
And I didn't even know it was going to be a dress rehearsal, but I remember when they said you're going to get stranger danger, I was like, oh my God, do you know how many twists you could do on this? Because there is a twist, and I won't tell you what it is. That was actually like jarring to finish the day with, that I was not expecting the response, good or bad, to what we did. And I'm still a little floored by it, but that also shows you why these topics are evergreen. Stranger
Yeah.
danger and teaching kids uh, the trigger words, where help is, what helpers look like. The work is endless in keeping our kids safe and keeping the community's kids safe, the world's kids safe. But
Yeah.
everyone has to be looking for it.
You said that beautifully. The other thing though is this show has a lot of humor as well. Like, I was wondering what the hardest you've laughed in working on What Would You Do? Has there been a moment that stands out to you where you're like, I don't even know how the actors did it in that scenario?
So I actually get more nervous when it gets intense.
Of
When
course.
it's hard because you're watching, and like when they react, and we have security, we have protections, no one's at risk. But when you see someone react and that actor's like, this is all, like this is we're trying to, you can see them get nervous. So I have that response. There's been one time I laughed, and it's actually only so there was once a scenario where we were not getting a reaction. So it's actually something we had to do another day. But we were in a state where this little boy kept walking out of the store, and the scenario was like a babysitter, a neglectful babysitter / sister who's not watching. By the end of the scene, there was no one responding, and we actually still mimic this little boy. He's literally walking out the front door, which is not funny, into traffic going, I'm walking out into traffic by myself. And like,
Oh,
it's awful, but like, it's become a running joke because the actor had to get so big and get louder and louder, and all we're hearing is, I'm by myself, I'm walking. And the
oh my God.
absurdity of this, but that ended up being one of our most quoted moments. This boy was the most beautiful little boy, but he just kept getting that there's traffic out here. And like, so it's not funny on its face, but it has
No, but
become one of the funniest moments of this shooting season for me.
well, and one of my favorite moments is always the reveal. And like, I was just watching that clip, and you come out to the grandma who has now said, I am watching this little girl. Like, like, no, I'm staying here. And you come out and you're like, hey, I'm Sara Haines from ABC. And she's like, not now, I'm busy. And then you're like, no, this child's an actor. And she's like, oh, okay. Like, that's one of my favorite moments of all of these shows is when Mr. Quinones or you come out. And then it's like, do you get always that reaction of like, oh, okay.
Well, like me, even when I'm walking out, there are times where I'm like, where's John? We need John. Because I was such a fan of the show because of John. So there are times where people are like, wait, they're not putting it together yet because John Quinones is that show. So I totally get they're adjusting to me helping out. But the hard part is, some people don't react well. They do think it's not cool to be tricked. But And so the bad reactions are the ones you almost have to prepare yourselves, and you have to really walk them through that we are, humanity is good and there are good people everywhere, but if you don't show people at home what that looks like, sometimes you want to believe you're one of those people, but when the stress hits and the adrenaline pumps, you look away, you're busy, you're on your screen, you're not doing it. Without shows like this to highlight what it looks like to let that village, because it takes a village, to help out, you don't always have an example, and that's like representation, and unless you see it you can't believe it. This show is a constant example, and people love watching it, not only because they see good people, but they see how to be good people. And I think that's the part where when you get that to register for people, you're like, this isn't to be sensational, this isn't to trick you, this is to highlight the best of us and be an example.
That's it exactly. Is that that what, like you said, of like we want to see something. We need to sometimes be able to have an example that we can point to of how we are. Like, and it's so affirming right now, especially to see that, man, there we are still good. There
Yep.
is still so much good, and we can learn these lessons. And it's not like this, you're in a class studying math. This is such an entertaining show to watch
Yep.
on top of it. So I think it's just done so masterfully. When Mr. Quinones was on, I asked him, and I was just curious, in your career, who have been your mentors throughout these years, or people that you have really learned for? I'm sure John is one of those
Oh
people, but
gosh.
who else where you were like, I am just blown away and I am learning so much from this person?
Well, one of the best examples I have would be Meredith Vieira, and that was because she was. I'd always dreamt of being on a show like The View, but I was
Yeah.
busy doing production, coordinating, and making rent. And so, while I was at the Today Show the other at NBC, Meredith became the lead anchor with Matt Lauer on the show. And I remember being blown away because I'd watched her from afar, having been a fan of The View since the beginning, knowing she had had my dream job. And now I got to work with her. And working with her was the most affirming experience ever, because what I loved about Meredith Vieira is she is a fierce boss that couldn't help but keep rising to the top of wherever she was. But she never lost sight of her North Star, which was her family. She did something that's hard for any professional to do, extra precarious for women, to leave when she'd had some children, but when she was having her kids, that didn't sound right. She, she left 60 Minutes in journalism because she thought, this moment only comes once. She climbed right back to the top, and then she left for several reasons, but one of which is her husband Richard, who has MS and her kids, and she knew. I mean, again, that wasn't the only reason, but she never lost sight of what it's all about, and that's easy to do when you're Meredith Vieira, and she never lost her grounding. And I think you see so few people that are like that, that to know there were people like her that could be good, could be rooted in what's right, that can be your superpower, and that was her superpower. And so I've always looked to her, and then along the way, every journalist I've had the honor of working with, watching not only John Quinones, but like Juju Chang is someone I love, Deborah Roberts, all the hosts, obviously at The View. I've watched legends like Whoopi and Joy. Um, but there's been a slew of examples. It often is the humbling experience of, why am I in this room right now?
Well, I mean, I think we know. I mean, you are a formidable presence on television, so I know why you're in the room. But it's so great to hear you speak about that because, like I deal with imposter syndrome all the time. Everybody does. And I just thought so interesting of a career, putting yourself on what would you do? You never know what's going to happen. It's all like, what are we going to get in these scenarios? But then also going on to The View, 28 seasons, and you never know what what conversation you're going to be in. You have to always be prepared, always be flexible. And it's like your tool belt is so full of just kind of these qualities that you have to learn. And I was just wondering how much you beat yourself up at the end of the day, or you kind of just ride it through and like just trust the process.
No, I beat myself up every day. And imposter syndrome is literally like my evil twin. I don't think, it's kind of like, I also have diagnosed OCD. And a doctor once said to me, you never get rid of OCD, you learn to cope with OCD. So I feel the same way about imposter syndrome. I don't think you beat it, I don't think you get past it. I absolutely think you learn to coexist with it and continue to thrive and not let it rule you. but it's not going anywhere. It's always going to be there. Um, Mainly because you'll notice some of the common themes in my career are I like unscripted shows where I get to be me. One thing that never worked for me in acting is I was trying to be other people, and I guess I didn't do that as well as I'd hoped. So here I am. But uh, some of it suits me because I love that there are people that I represent. You know, being from Iowa, I remember when I first came and I got a chance to co-host. And they always ask you when you're working towards these things, like, what do you like about the show? What do you not like about the show? And I remember saying there was a point where I said, it's all celebrities. Like, I can't relate to all celebrities. It's just not how I grew up, and I know I could speak for a vast chunk of this country that, like Fridays were football games. We went to high school and dances and, we ate some food you'd call crappy that we loved. And we subsisted off it, like just a different world. And to know I could come to that table and feel a deep pride for so many people that are like, oh my God, we used to do that too. So it gave me a stronger part when I didn't look at it as if this is for me, but when I looked at it, it's for everyone that I grew up next to. It's community, it's Iowa, it's my family, it's my college, it's my, it's athletes. I was an athlete through college. It's every hat you wear, you get to be a voice for all those people.
Yeah,
And
you're
that's
bringing
what
all of your life experience, and it represents a huge swath of people that need to be represented. And I wanted to point out, I mean, you grew up in Newton, Iowa, and now on September 18th, your birthday, it is Sara Haines Day every September. I mean, is that blow your mind that your town has a Sara Haines Day?
Okay, well, one, I'm the only person that absolutely celebrates that. It can be on the books, but it's kind of like International Pickle Day.
We are all
No one,
celebrating this year. We are all celebrating this next Sara Haines Day. I will mark it and we'll celebrate.
well, there's something funny about though, when I heard that, I actually got emotional because I found out like the mayor of Newton, who I've been out of that, I go back, but we're not a presence anymore. My family was there. And when you're a family in town, someone knows someone in your family and they moved out. So I was like, the mayor knows who I am. Like, I was so excited. I think there's something about where you come from, whether like not only Newton, my hometown, but Iowa. People still send me clips when the Des Moines Register includes anything about me. And I call my parents. I'm like, Dad, the Des Moines Register just put a little article. And when we went back for What Would You Do, a reporter from the Des Moines Register slip into my DMs and I happened to be home in Newton and I'm showing my best friend. I was like, we got a call. Like, it's like, what if it's a scam? And I was like, well, whatever. Like, we're at your house, not mine. That's your, so
what if you're a subject on What Would You Do? And they're actually, the cameras are on you. And then John Quinones, so like, we weren't actually with the Newton.
I'd be punked so fast because if they drop things like Iowa or Newton, I was so deeply in and I let that reporter come to the set. I'm like, we need clearance. Des Moines Register coming through. Like, and every single time it gets me because that little girl in me read that Des Moines Register every day when I ate my cereal. It was back when we read hard material and not screens. Like that, I mean, it is so iconic. You can't undo that nostalgic way you perceive things. It's kind of like seeing your childhood idol and like feeling weak in the knees. You're like, it's New Kids on the Block. And people are like, it's New Kids on the Block. And I'm like, don't make me cry. Like it just never changes.
Yeah, I went to my childhood home in like Olathe, Kansas this past summer.
Oh my God, my sister lived in Olathe. I have spent years going to Olathe.
That's where I grew up, and I hadn't been there in decades. And I went back, I saw my childhood home, I saw my elementary school, and it was just this wave of nostalgia and like how small everything looked, but how small I still felt in some ways. Yeah. And it was just this mind blowing. So I totally get what you're saying. Also, I wanted to point out to the audience, did you start off as like a page at 30 Rock in NBC?
Yep. And I even got that job funny because I thought once I got a degree at Smith College, like I'd be good. I didn't realize that because no one goes to Smith College from Iowa. Most people go to the state schools, and it's a small women's school in Massachusetts. And it was the hardest thing I've ever done, but I got through and I thought, I'm good now. I can do anything. What I didn't realize is everyone on the coast goes to amazing schools and they have 10 internships to back it up. Well, I used to go home for the summers because I had to make money. So I'd wait tables. I was a nanny. I worked at the state fair. I did everything. Well, I had nothing on my resume. And now looking back, I would never have gotten in that program, but I stopped a guy that I followed on the train for weeks. And I ended up, he had an NBC bag, and I ended up stopping him. And that was in the day where at least you could get someone to hand your resume along. And if you did that, they'd do you probably the courtesy of meeting with you. I knew once I got in the door, I could sell myself because I was so enthusiastic. I'm such a hard worker. I always say I'm not the most talented person in any room, but I'm always the hardest worker in any room. And so that is a calling card. And that's really what I credit to getting in, because once I was in and saw the types of people, talk about imposter syndrome, I was like, they'd all worked in TV. They knew the terms. They knew. I thought there was a director and a producer and someone that said, action. I didn't know anything. I studied government. I'd never been near studios. I'd never been near audio equipment. Like, I'd never done anything. And I thought, what have I done? But it was like boot camp for someone who had
Yeah.
never studied. I spent my days shadowing, sponging, doing anything I could to learn everything I could about the business. And that program is still what I credit to being here today.
Wow. I mean, I love that. I also want to point out, you said you started as an actor. Now your career in news has led you to acting. You were in the second episode of The Falcon and Winter Soldier on Disney Plus, playing a reporter, but you got to fulfill the acting bug as well.
So I had to play myself.
Hey,
And
it starts somewhere.
but the hard part is playing yourself scripted. So normally when you're playing yourself, you're unscripted. Playing yourself with a script, I was like, this is so hard. But it was phenomenal. And I did realize at that point I was cool, because I've never heard from so many people that I did. I still hear from people and they're like, I had no idea. And I was like, I shot that 2 years before it ever aired. I'd forgotten, because I
Yeah.
was on a football field in Atlanta, using a breast pump in a tent, because I had given birth to my son, Caleb, and they said, can you fly? And it was like an overnight shoot. And I was like, yeah, as long as I got my milk, I'm fine. And I have pictures being on the bottom of a tent trying to like pump so I could do the shoot, but it all worked out.
That's incredible. I have a couple more minutes with you, and I did want to mention, like, The View, you got Hot Topics back, you got all of these things, and then recently it was announced that I think, this week when this airs, the Halloween episode, you guys won't be dressing up this episode. Were you bummed about that? How did you feel? I know we're in kind of divisive times, obviously, because of the election. How did you feel about that decision?
So in an election year, it's so hard because you're literally gearing up every day. Everyone says once the election's over, once they say that for like the full year, leading up to it being the week before. I mean, like work days, I think it's 3 days before. It's really hard to have these consequential conversations about things happening in the nation and being dressed up like a pregnant Smurf. Like, it's like,
Yeah.
so I just,
because you don't want that to be the meme. You don't want that to be the meme. The way the internet works now, you're right. That would be the meme or the TikTok clip.
well, and honestly, for me, I could probably pull it off purely because I remember being on some awkward shows where I was in like birthday capes and crowns, and I kind of forgot I was in those things while having these conversations. But you have Alyssa and Whoopi, Joy, Sunny, Anna, and we're talking about some pretty heavy stuff. And like,
Yeah.
you're just asking to be trolled. And not to mention, each day things are getting so hot that each day it's no struggle to come up with. You have to really narrow down what is the hot political story, because right now new things are being said. There's new stuff. It's too rich and ripe to give away a day when you're and we don't know how to do it halfway. So like, how do you? But we do have Halloween fun planned. We just won't be again ripping apart political topics dressed in full
In a
garb.
Dracula outfit.
Yes,
Yeah, I got it.
yes.
Yeah. Well, I do want to say though, like, and what would you do? I think, like we said, is the perfect example of this, of something like, not doom scrolling, it's hope scrolling. It's like,
Yeah.
this is something good. This isn't medicine. It's just good entertainment that teaches
Yeah.
you that we're good people and teaches you to be a good person. And that's what I wanted to say, working on The View and working on this. Do you still personally, I know this is a loaded question, do you have hope for where we're at right now? Like, I mean, sometimes I talk to my listeners, they'll be like, I am just so bummed right now. I'm so down. I'm so like, where are you at? Like, how do you go in and do these intense stories every day? Or even what would you do? Intense scenarios. Do you have a lot of hope personally?
I absolutely do. It was either born into me or this world has continued to pump me full. And by the way, I do suffer with anxiety and depression. So I'm not saying I don't have dark days where I'm like, it's all over and like on the floor. But what I check in with is I always know my own humanity, the integrity I was raised with, the way my parents operate would, as I said, I remember saying the thing I love most about both parents, but specifically my dad, is he's the type of guy that would stop at a stop sign if humanity had been wiped out by an apocalypse. Like, rules are rules, he follows them. And I've always loved that center feeling. And when you check in with yourself and you say, wait, I'm a good person, I'm not alone here. So then you start to do the math of how many good people are walking around, and we let the loudest, angriest minority define us. You're not going to hear the good, solid people that are living their lives on Twitter every day. Not to say they're not on Twitter, but that's not the volume of Twitter, nor is it the volume of media. Media is a business, and if it bleeds, it leads. Think about that. If it bleeds, it
Yeah, the
leads.
anger economy. That's what I mean. The anger
Yeah.
economy, the thing that gets us yelling and hyper and our blood pressure up. And that's why what would you do is this perfect antidote of like, yeah, you want to see real, but you also get this like feeling of pride being a part of like people that do good
Yeah.
things. And I think that's why this is a shining example. Finally, listen, you are nonstop, you have a family, all of this stuff. Do you have some guilty pleasures in what you watch? Because ABC, I watch What Would You Do? I watch The Golden Bachelorette. We got the
Yes.
morning show. I mean, The View, I always watch. But like, what are your guilty pleasures, TV, movie, music wise?
Okay, so guilty pleasures when it comes to TV. One, I'm a true crime fanatic. I love podcasts. And let me just be clear, because I've had to make this clear on the show. I don't like the voyeuristic, like how crappy and scary is it. I like that so many of the best crime podcasts are about featuring the victims too, and raising awareness to bring attention back to cases that are being solved in real time because someone cared enough to pay attention. So it's not just like, like, show me the most awful story and let me fall asleep to it. Like, it's not that. But true crime, which I just watched the new Anna Kendrick movie, Woman of the Hour,
Oh
about the
yeah, about the Rodney Akala, the game show.
yes,
Yeah.
definitely watched that. That's really good. I always watch Emily in Paris, which is not even my jam. I'm not into fashion or anything, but I watched one episode or two the first season and I couldn't stop watching. I watch pretty much anything that pops on that I hear someone talking about. Oh my God, the newest one, Nobody Wants This. Have you seen that with Kristen Bell?
Oh, the first episode, you're like, oh, this is great. And then all 10 episodes are great. Like a
You
perfect
start one
sitcom.
and all of a sudden you're on the 10th one and you're like, how did I just stream this whole season? That is phenomenal. I mean,
Yeah.
so again, you kind of catch the bug. Someone says, check this out, and then I deep dive. But I also give zero patience anymore. If it doesn't get me for the reason someone said it will, like the writing's amazing, the performance is amazing. If people aren't honest about why, I quit one episode in. And that's the problem we're up against with the deluge of material.
I know, right? It's just so much all the time. And that's why something like What Would You Do? It kind of stands out as like, at
Yep.
least I know this will be good. And what's next for you, Sarah? Because I mean, I severely geeked out, which by the way, thank you for all of this because man, this was so lovely. But what are you up to next? I mean, we always have The View. What would you do? I feel like, are we like on the precipice of like a Sarah Haines show? What are we doing
I'm
next?
trying to take over the world, if you hadn't noticed.
I know I got the hint. I think we're close. 2025.
Well, the one thing I miss is I did The Chase for a few seasons, and they haven't bought the game show again because obviously, like they have to pick it up. They haven't canceled it, so I'm always like crossing my fingers because that's an adrenaline rush as someone who loves games and game shows. New project wise, there's nothing on the horizon, but I'm also loving kind of what's going on right now, because my
Yeah,
job
you've got a lot. Yeah,
in
you've
all
got
its
a lot.
beauty allows me to also do the very humbling job of momming. And there is nothing that beats you up more or beats me up more than being a parent. And so I'm definitely staying grounded with all the humility that surrounds me every day. In fact,
Yeah,
that's where
who are tougher? Is the View panel tougher than your kids, or are the kids tougher than the View panel?
kids easily. You know why? Because you love them more than anything in the world. And not only do they torment you, but you feel like you're failing them. Like the amount of pep talks I give myself at the end of the day. I remember like 2 days ago having a moment where I was like screaming and I wasn't patient, and I meditate and like I could tell myself I was being reactive. Last night I like applied some of it and I went to bed and I was like, you killed it, girl. You killed it today. Like,
Um, Okay, you guys, I could keep this going forever, but obviously we have a very busy person here taking over the world. I want to remind people that Sara Haines Day is September 18th. We all celebrate that now, but
Yes.
also, what would you do Wednesday nights on ABC? You can stream on Hulu next day, but you can also catch up on 17 seasons of material. Go check out The View if you haven't. It's always a very lively discussion that will is part of kind of our the pop culture lexicon now. But Sara Haines, I hope to talk to you again someday because this was just
Yes.
fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ryan. It was a joy being here with you.